Hey guys, this is International Master Eric Rosen, and welcome to my first ever video course. Really excited to get into it, but before we get into the actual chess content, I do want to give a quick introduction of what this course will be about, who it's for, how to best approach it, and also to give some background about myself. So I received the International Master title 3 years ago in 2015. And last year, I graduated from Webster University, where I was coached by former world women's champion Susan Polgar, and I trained alongside many very strong elite GMs, including Ray Robson, Alexander Shimanov, Laquan Liem, who's 30 in the world. And recently, I've been traveling around the world, playing in a lot of international events, and I've also been coaching students from around the world, too. On top of that, I put out a lot of content online. It's very possible that people have seen me before from my YouTube channel or my Twitch channel. I also do lectures on the St. Louis Chess Club YouTube channel. So between those platforms, I would hope that if you're watching this, you have at least seen some of my content before. Now, I'm also a very big fan of the London Opening, which is why I've agreed to make a course. This will be an 8-hour video course covering tactics in the London Opening. And if you haven't seen a video that I've done for the St. Louis Chess Club, it's called How to Beat Good Players with the London Opening. I would highly recommend that you watch that before proceeding. It'll give you a better sense of my teaching style, also give you some practical ideas in the London Opening. And if you like what you see, then perhaps you can make a better decision to see whether or not this course is for you. So this course is going to cover a wide array of different positions in the London Opening. It's going to cover, first of all, we have about 9 video lessons covering a very instructive game. And then we have 50 tactical exercises of varying levels of difficulty. And this is something that if you've purchased the course, you'll have be able to download and be able to start solving. So there's going to be a lot of content, and hopefully it's worthwhile. If you're perhaps a beginning level player and you're looking for some opening, London Opening is a great opening to learn. And it's one of these openings where, yeah, there's a lot of theory to memorize, but rather than trying to force students just to memorize specific variations, I'm taking a different approach and focusing on kind of the common and recurring tactical themes and the motifs. We're going to cover a lot of the typical tactics that you'll see in the London Opening, along with some recurring positional ideas too. And we're going to see the overlap between tactical chess and positional chess throughout the course. And I will be presenting not only a number of instructive positions, but just a number of instructive games, which hopefully students can gain some value from. So without further ado, we will begin our journey, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, so before we get into the chess, I do want to take a moment and explain how to use this course. There will be 50 tactics to solve, and if you've already purchased the course, you'll hopefully have these tactics downloaded, and maybe you're already solving them. I would recommend that you solve the tactics before continuing the video lessons, because the best approach is to really try and be proactive, try and solve the tactics without any assistance. If you run into trouble, if you can't solve all of them, that's perfectly normal. And that's why I'll be covering every single position and exercise in depth throughout the course. But before we get to the tactics, I do want to provide several lessons to demonstrate some different ideas in the London. And every lesson will be a game. And these games are meant to really show the venom of the London, show how very strong masters can go down seemingly very easily. And hopefully there will be a lot of inspiration to gain by watching these videos. So solve the tactics, watch the videos, and then if you want to, go back to the tactics and see if you can better solve them. So let's get into the first game. This is one of my favorite games ever in the London. Not only because it's played by world champion Magnus Carlsen, but also because I've used the same game, Magnus's same opening preparation, to defeat a handful of players once in a tournament and a couple times online. Now the setup that Magnus played, very simple, starting with d4. Now I'm going to assume that most players know what the London is. We're not going to spend too much time talking about what is a London opening, but essentially d4 and bishop f4 is automatic London, and it's the type of thing you can play against most black setups. In this game, black chose one of the more common setups, perhaps one of the most popular lines. After knight c6, Magnus plays knight d2, e6, knight f3, bishop d6, and perhaps this is the first moment we can discuss where the bishops are now staring at each other. And it's a question, what should white do with the bishop on f4? You can leave it there, you can trade on d6, you can retreat to g3. The general rule is to retreat to g3 for a few reasons. Of course, you don't want to kind of damage your pawn structure by having to take with the e-pawn. But also, if black ever takes on g3 now, you would be very happy to open the h-file for the rook. And we will see this idea many times throughout the course. So tension remains between the bishops. Carlsen's opponent, very strong GM, Marin Bosiocic, castled in this position. And now Magnus played perhaps a secondary move. The most common move by far in this position is bishop d3. Very playable move. I've actually talked about this move in previous lectures that I've done. But Magnus played a more trendy move in this position, and actually a somewhat venomous move if black is unprepared. He played bishop to b5. The idea of this move is to potentially capture on c6. And there's some nice positional ideas if black isn't careful. I do want to show. Let's imagine black plays a6. Bishop takes c6, takes c6, and then the idea for white is queen a4. And I've actually had a number of games where black runs into some trouble. Let's imagine plays a natural move like bishop b7, defending the pawn on c6. Then white has a nice idea to capture on d6, queen takes d6, and then queen a3. And if I'm not mistaken, this is winning a pawn because of the pin. Knight d7 would be forced, and then knight b3 and c5 is not only pinned, but it's attacked 3 times by the knight, the pawn, and the queen. And I'm looking at this game up on the online database, and it's been played several times on Lichess. White has a very good score in this position. So going back, because white is potentially threatening to take on c6, Bosiocic played a very normal-looking move here, knight to e7, which when you first look at it, it's very logical. There's ideas of perhaps maneuvering the knight to f5, and black is also leaving the bishop on b5 a bit misplaced. However, based on this game, I will say that knight e7 maybe isn't the best move for black because of white's very simple reply, bishop to d3. And if we take a look at this position, we can compare it to just a couple moves ago. Let's go back a couple moves. If white played bishop d3 here, we actually reach the same position as in this knight e7 line, only the knight is more actively placed on c6. If we go forward to what happened after bishop b5, knight e7, the bishop retreating to d3, it's the same position, but black's knight is just slightly more misplaced. And we're going to see how this plays a role later in the game. So Bosiocic continued, normal move, pawn b6. And now Carlsen played a very, very strong move here. And I would encourage viewers to pause the video and attempt to find the next move for white. It's, actually, I don't want to give too many clues, but I will give you guys a chance. Pause your video, find the move for white. And now we'll go on. So the move played is a very strong central strike. And it's a bit unusual for this sort of situation where black is castled and white's king is still in the center. And normally in these sort of situations, you don't want to open up the center until your king is safely castled. But in this position, Carlsen actually breaks this principle and goes for the central expansion with pawn e4. And the reason why this is so strong is because there's a number of targets in black's position that are perhaps vulnerable for tactics. If we see right away, the obvious threat for white is playing e5, hitting the bishop on d6, as well as the knight on f6. On top of that, there's many lines where the rook on a8 could be attacked, and also the pawn on h7, and we're going to see this play out in just a few moves. So in this position, black has to respond to the immediate threats, really doesn't want to allow white to play e5 and just get an amazing space advantage. So Wojciech played probably the only logical move here, d take e4. And after knight take e4, Carlsen keeps initiative. This is another very big theme of this game. Once e4 was played, Carlsen didn't really let the initiative go until he had a winning advantage. We'll see how that happens. So after knight take e4, white is clearly threatening the bishop on d6. Black has to respond. Black takes on e4. Bishop take e4, recapturing, hitting the rook on a8. Only move for black is to play rook b8. And now in this position, because bishop on g3 is aligned with the rook on b8, Carlsen plays just a very simple move, d takes c5. And this essentially wins a pawn. If we look at black's situation, this bishop is attacked 3 times. So there's no time to actually recapture on c5. Bishop takes c5 would just lose a rook on b8. So because of this, black's next move is pretty much forced. Bishop take g3. And now Carlsen plays the very simple h take g3. And as we saw earlier, or as I mentioned earlier, the potential for the h file to open up can be very dangerous. And we see that in this position. White is up a pawn currently, has won the pawn on c5. And with recapturing on g3, white is now attacking the pawn on h7. So black is already under some pretty big pressure. Now from this position, black played f5, which maybe is the best try, given that, you attack the bishop and trying to eventually recapture the pawn. But from this point forward, there's actually a forced combination for white to further increase the advantage. And I recommend that you pause the video and try and find the continuation for white. So the move here is not to defend the bishop, but it's to go for counterplay. This is a really important concept in chess. When you're being attacked, you, of course, do want to consider just defending, but it's really important to also consider going for counterplay and trying to seize initiative from your opponent. In this case, Carlsen plays a very nice sequence, starting with queen take d8, rook take d8. And now a move like bishop to c2 would perhaps concede the advantage because then black could regain the pawn, but very nice move from white, pawn c6. Leaving the bishop on e4 undefended, but having the menacing threat of pawn c7 forking the rooks. So if we imagine pawn take e4, pawn c7, this is going to end very badly for black because white is guaranteed to win material and just have a decisive advantage. So going back to this position, black is already lost, and now we'll just kind of see how Carlsen converts the position with very nice ease. After knight d5, very simply captures on d5, rook take d5, Carlsen goes ahead, initiates the trade on the d file. And this pawn on c6, it looks weak, but black can't really attack it or win it. And as we'll see, after bishop a6, knight e5, very beautiful knight in the heart of black's position, supporting the pawn on c6. Just a few more moves were played after rook c8, c4, b5, and then very nice move b4, allowing b takes c4, but then a4. And Carlsen just continues with this very aesthetic pawn storm. Rook d8 check was played, king c2, rook d5, and then the nail in the coffin, pawn f4, reinforcing the knight, and Bosiocic resigned in this position. It's a very nice 25 move win. Very nice miniature from Carlsen. And I really like this game because initiative was just it just started after e4, and Black really had very few resources to deal with the pressure that White was able to exert in the position. And this is something we see a lot in the London because of White's very harmonious setup. Sometimes when the center opens up, White is just better prepared for the resulting tactics, and we can see that White really never let go of the threats. So going forward, I want to show one small nuance in this opening, because I actually reached this position in a tournament game. It was a rapid tournament, playing someone pretty significantly lower rated than me, and I actually forgot what to do here. I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to take on d8 or take on g3, and I took on d8. And I'm showing this because it can actually transpose into the Carlsen game, but there's a nice kind of nuance where we're allowing Black to take on f2, which looks like a very natural response, because after bishop take f2, Black does regain the pawn. But this is actually a trap, and if Black plays bishop take f2, it's just going to be lost, because after king take f2, rook take d8, we see the same theme of pawn c6, and c7 is very hard to meet. I think the only move for Black is to play knight to d5 in this position, and after a move like rook ht1, White is threatening c4 and c7, and this would just be lost. So I would recommend, if you do get this position and you have the choice between h take g3 or queen take d8, I would recommend going for queen take d8, giving the opportunity for Black to go wrong with bishop take f2. And if rook take d8 is played, it's just a transposition where if f5 is played here, we can continue. Same idea as Carlsen with c6. So I hope this demonstrates some nice ideas in the London. Going back to the opening with bishop to b5, this is a relatively new line, and it's a line which is still developing in opening theory. But this is one of the games which really has made this line more intriguing for the White side. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. We're going to take a look at some other games demonstrating some nice play in the London, and stay tuned for the next lesson. Welcome back, everyone, to lesson number 2. We're going to continue from where we left off and look at another pretty high-level game where White was able to use a lot of initiative from early on to get a very big attack in the middle game. And we're going to see some overlapping themes. In the previous game, we saw Carlsen grab the initiative basically right out of the opening. And we're going to see kind of a similar situation with Alexander Grishuk playing the white pieces, super grandmaster. If you take chess at all seriously, you've heard of him. And in this game, he completely demolishes a lower-rated grandmaster, Rustam Kusnudinov. And this was in the World Blitz Championship. And even though this is a Blitz game, Grishuk just played flawlessly. And it's one of these games you should probably just know by heart. So going forward, we're going to see a very different structure compared to last game. In this game, Black starts out as perhaps going for King's Indian with pawn g6. And this is a common sort of move order you'll run into as a London player, where sometimes Black wants to play d6, bishop g7, put the question to the bishop on f4. Now, for many years, the kind of classical way for White to play was some setup with e3, knight f3, bishop e2, castle, which led to perhaps a more quieter game and didn't really have too much venom. And I will admit, at least personally, I was very hesitant to play the London, especially starting out, because of the King's Indian setup. And it took it took a while before I realized that there's some other very interesting options for White in this position. And the move I can highly advocate for, and it's a very interesting, very trendy move these days, is to play this move knight c3. With the idea that you're not going for the typical London structure of maybe the solid c3 and e3 and bishop d3, but rather you're going for the immediate center expansion with e4. And this is exactly what Grishuk is going for. The idea that if black plays bishop g7, white would play e4. And this is actually not a King's Indian. This is a Pirt's defense, where the main plan for white is queen d2 and queenside castle. And a lot of the times you can kind of take black out of their comfort zone if they're not expecting this sort of move order. And if they happen to stumble into it, it can lead to a lot of exciting positions for white. And we will take a look at some other positions resulting from this line later on in the course. But for this game, black decided to prevent e4 with one of the most natural moves in the position, pawn d5. Very reasonable move, controlling the e4 square and just planning to continue to develop. And meanwhile, maybe questioning the knight on c3, where it doesn't serve too much of a purpose in this position. So Grishuk continues with a relatively creative and very ambitious idea. He starts with e3. After bishop g7, the perhaps very aggressive, maybe somewhat unnecessary looking move, pawn h4. Sometimes you see this type of move in a bullet game if you're just looking to attack right away. But in this specific position, h4 makes some sense, because h5 is a real possibility. And I would like to demonstrate one line, which is one of the key lines in this variation. If black does decide to castle here, white can go ahead and play h5 immediately. And after knight take h5, it turns out rook take h5 is actually a very sound sacrifice. And if you can get to this position as white, you are down the exchange for a pawn, but there's more than enough compensation. I think even Stockfish will prefer white maybe a plus 0.8 or plus 1 advantage. Turning on Stockfish right now, it says plus 1.3 for white. That's when you know you're in like a good position, when you're down material and Stockfish is giving you a very generous edge. Simply because white has so much active play in this position, not only hitting the pawn on d5, but also just very logical developing moves like bishop d3, knight f3, of course queenside castling, bringing the rook to the half-open h-file. And there's so much checkmating potential in this line. So I've caught a lot of players off guard with this. A lot of players will take on h5 thinking that it's going to be a fight, but usually these sort of positions after rook take h5 are pretty one-sided in white's favor. So going back to this position, it is pretty risky for black to castle there. So it's more common for black to try and deal with this idea of playing h5. And one of the most common moves for black here was played in the game, pawn h6. Idea that perhaps if h5 is played, black can respond with g5. And now for the next several moves, Grishuk develops in probably the most harmonious fashion. Knight f3, bishop g4 pinning the knight, bishop e2 breaking the pin. And after c6, Grishuk plays a very thematic move for this position, simply knight e5, given that white has very good control over the e5 square. And arguably the knight is not, it's not an outpost because there is a pawn on f6, but black never wants to play pawn f6, so the knight stands very well on e5. So the bishops got traded, bishop take e2, queen take e2. We'll go forward a few moves here. White completes development with castling queenside, and after queen a5, king b1, very solid move, making sure the king is in a safe position, kind of anticipating that if the center opens up later, you do want your king on b1, also especially defending the a2 pawn. So the knights got traded on e5, and then we should note in this position, white is doing very well. I mean, has very nice bishop on e5 now, has some threat of perhaps playing h5. If we imagine it's white's move and white's able to play h5, the knight would not be able to take on h5 because of rook take h5. And that would be winning material for white. So it's a bit uncomfortable for black, not to mention that the king is still in the center, and it's not clear where black should castle. Because if black castles kingside or queenside, there's potential for white to really attack on all areas of the board. So in this position, black played a maybe natural move, pawn h5, preventing white from playing h5. And now we have a very key position. We can pretty much say that we're done with the opening stage. I mean, white has completed development, has the king safe. And it's really a question how to proceed from this position, how to maybe go for some transformation, how to make progress. And I want you to think in this position and come up with some ideas, some plan. Maybe it can be one move, it can be multiple moves, but really I want you to put yourself in more of a tournament situation and figure out what you would do next as white. So I'll give you some time to think. Feel free to pause the video and find the best continuation for white in this position. Okay, so I hope you had some time to think. I'd like to show this position to a lot of students because the best move is maybe not the most obvious move. And a lot of students struggle, I've seen, when they reach the middle game, and then it's not clear what to do next. Like, there's a few questions you can ask yourself, like how to improve the pieces, look for tactics, identify the opponent's threats. But this position, it's all about trying to further white's advantage, given that white's setup is nice, black's king is still in the center. And the main goal for white in this position is to open up the center. So hopefully you managed to find the best move, pawn e4. Incredibly powerful move, as it opens, not only is it forcing the opening of the e-file, but it's putting maximum pressure on black's setup, given the knight is pinned to the bishop on g7, and white is finally making use of the knight on c3, given the knight now supports the e-pawn and applies pressure to the d-pawn. And we're going to see how this move leads to a lot more initiative very soon in the game. I also want to note that this is a bit reminiscent of the Carlsen game that we just saw, where Carlsen played e4 to open up the center very much in his favor. And this game is no different. It's gonna the center is going to open up in white's favor. So black had a difficult choice here. Black castle kingside or queenside. Kuznetsov chose to castle queenside here, which at first looks like not a bad option, given that you get the rook to d8, you get the king off e8. The problem with this move is that white's bishop pierces through the position, preventing any king b8, king a8. And white is now going to have a long-term target, given the king is pretty much stuck towards the center. So the game continues. Trade happens on e5, on d5. And now the next move from Grishuk in this position is really impressive. And I would actually encourage viewers to pause the video and think how to continue in this position, how to further optimize the position and create some sort of attack. So I hope you guys had some time to think. The move that was played in this position is maybe somewhat unexpected. And I feel like a lot of players would perhaps consider the very direct knight b5. But the problem with this move, it's simply met with a6. And unfortunately, the tactics don't quite work out for whites. I mean, the initial plan would be to play bishop c7, but this just fails to queen take b5, and black is actually winning material here. So white has to be a bit more creative in the way that you're able to kind of orchestrate the attack. And of course, when you want to plan an attack, you want to bring all the pieces into the game and make sure that the pieces can work together. In this position, I usually like to force my students to ask themselves a very simple question. What is the piece in this position which is doing nothing for whites? And how can you make it do something? And if we look at the position, it's very clear. The rook on h1 doing nothing. And when we ask ourselves a simple question, we can actually see the very aesthetic idea of rook to h3, which was played by Grishuk. And this is just such a powerful move, given that white is now planning this nice rook lift along the third rank. This doesn't happen every day, where the whole third rank is clear of pawns, and the rook can actually come over very quickly and participate in the attack. And really, from this point forward, white was able to convert the attack very nicely. Go forward one move, rook d7, and now knight b5, incredibly strong with the threat of rook c3, which is pretty devastating to the black king. And there's not much black can do to meet this threat. At this point, we can kind of sit back, relax, and see how Bishop finishes things off after a6, rook c3 check, and then after king d8, another very aesthetic move, knight to a7, going into the heart of black's territory, and actually just threatening mate in one, rook c8, which isn't the easiest threat to stop. Black played perhaps the only logical move, e6, creating an escape square for the king. But then queen f3 played another very nice move, attacking from all directions. Rook c8, of course, still can be played at any time. Queen f3 just improves the queen, targets the knight, which is now less defended on f6. Not to mention the knight is still pinned. So black had to play king e7. And now there's just a forced way to win material for white. Knight c8 check, either driving away from the king from defending the knight on f6, or what happened in the game, forcing the rook to capture. After rook takes c8, white is now up the exchange, still has a very strong attack. And after rook t8, one more simple tactic to finish things off, bishop c7, and black resigned without really putting up much of a fight. So this was a really instructive game, at least for me, to see how to really seize initiative from early on. And really the key moment was this position with this pawn thrust, e4. And sometimes this is what you want to look for in your own games. If you're completed development and you're castled, you want to look for ways to open up the position. That's usually the way to create initiative and enable future tactics. Because really the way you're able to create tactical possibilities later on is to create more open lines and also look for ways to create targets. In this case, the biggest target was black's king, which was very much suffering on c8. So I hope you guys can take away some value from this. Not only this nice opening variation with h4 on move 5, but really the way that a super grandmaster was able to treat the position. All the moves were very natural for white. And we can see that even like a strong player as black really went down with not much of a fight in this game. So we're going to continue the tactical themes and attacking themes in the coming lessons. So stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.